my daughter shouted, "Pay the rent or get out." So I left. She didn't know I owned the place. I sold it for $2.5 million. When the eviction notice arrived, my response left her speechless. It all started on a Tuesday, one of those perfectly ordinary days that you never think you'll remember. But then it becomes the hinge upon which your entire life swings. The morning air in my small workshop was thick with the scent of pine and cedar, a smell that had been my constant companion for over 30 years. I ran my hand over a piece of maple I was smoothing for a tabletop. The grain was beautiful, a swirling pattern like cream stirred into coffee. Woodworking was my peace. It was honest. You couldn't lie to a piece of wood. It would split on you. You couldn't cheat it. It would show every flaw. People, I was learning, were not so straightforward. I lived in the basement apartment of a handsome brownstone in a quiet, leafy part of the city. It wasn't much, just a couple of rooms. But the rent was cheap, and it was my own little sanctuary. The cement floors were always cool under my feet, and the single window looked out onto a small, forgotten garden. Above me lived my daughter, Jessica, and her boyfriend, Kevin. Hearing their footsteps on the floorboards above was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in the world, even though it often felt that way. That afternoon, the phone rang, cutting through the low hum of my belt sander. It was my wife, Sarah, or, well, my ex-wife. We had been divorced for 5 years, but the word still felt strange in my mouth, like a pebble I couldn't spit out. "Frank?" Her voice was the same as ever, a little breathless, a little demanding. "Hi, Sarah. Everything okay?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands onto my jeans. I'm fine, she said quickly. "Listen, I'm at the annual Children's Foundation Gala at the Prescott Hotel. My ride fell through. Can you come get me? It's for a good cause, you know." I sighed internally. The Prescott was on the other side of town, all glitz and valet parking, a world away from my dusty workshop. It had been her world, once our world. Before. "Yeah, sure, Sarah. What time?" "Around 10? Maybe 10:30? I'll text you," she said. And then, without another word, she hung up. "No, thank you. No, how are you?" Just the click of the line going dead. That was Sarah. The memory of a different phone call from years ago surfaced unbidden. It was the night that had cracked the foundation of my life. The details were seared into my brain. It was another charity event, another late night. She'd called me then too, asking for a ride. "I'll be waiting out front," she'd said. But when I got there, the curb was empty. I waited for 20 minutes, the engine idling, the soft glow of the dashboard illuminating my growing unease. I called her phone. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. A knot of cold dread had tightened in my stomach. I pictured all sorts of horrible things, a fall, a sudden illness. I parked the car, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and went inside. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and black tuxedos. Laughter and music washed over me. I scanned the crowd, my eyes darting from face to face, searching for her familiar smile. I couldn't find her. I asked a waiter if he'd seen her, describing her silver dress. He shook his head. I made my way toward the back, past the kitchens and the service corridors, thinking maybe she'd stepped out for some air. And that's when I saw it. Through a set of glass doors leading to a private terrace, I saw her. She wasn't in distress. She wasn't ill. She was standing with Mark, my business partner, my best friend since high school. Her back was to me, but I could see her hand resting on his arm. He was leaning in close, his face illuminated by the soft fairy lights strung along the railing. He whispered something in her ear, and she laughed, a low, intimate sound that was not meant for me. Then he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering on her cheek for a beat too long. The world went silent. The music from the ballroom faded into a dull roar. The air in my lungs turned to ice. It wasn't a dramatic, movie scene kiss. It was worse. It was a quiet, comfortable intimacy that spoke of shared secrets and a history I knew nothing about. It was the casualness of the betrayal that shattered me. They looked like they belonged together, and in that single, gut-wrenching moment, I realized I was the outsider in my own life. I didn't storm out there. I didn't shout. I just backed away, moving like a ghost through the bustling hotel, my body numb. I drove home on autopilot, the city lights blurring into streaks of color through my tear-filled eyes. The silence in the car was deafening. She came home hours later, humming a little tune, telling me what a wonderful time she'd had and how much money they'd raised for the children. She didn't notice the look in my eyes. Or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. That was the night my marriage died. The divorce was quiet, civil on the surface. She said I had grown distant, that I was always lost in my own world in the workshop. She made me sound like the villain, the cold, unfeeling husband. Our daughter Jessica was in college then, and she heard her mother's version. She believed it. In her eyes, I was the one who had failed. Sarah took the big house, the one I had built for us with my own 2 hands. I didn't fight her on it. I just wanted out. I kept my business assets and the brownstone, an investment property I'd bought years ago when the neighborhood was still up and coming. So now, 5 years later, another call, another hotel. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked around my small apartment. It was sparse but clean. A simple bed, a worn armchair, a small kitchen table. I had let Jessica believe I lost a lot in the divorce, that I was just getting by. I let her believe the brownstone was owned by some faceless corporation and I was just a tenant in the basement, lucky to have a place to live. I did it because I wanted to be near her. I thought if she saw me living simply, working with my hands, she might see the man I used to be. The father she'd loved before money and ambition had clouded her vision. I hoped we could rebuild what was broken. I was a fool. I finished my work for the day, cleaned my tools, and went upstairs to take a shower. The water sluiced over me, but it couldn't wash away the old memories. I put on a clean pair of jeans and a simple polo shirt. Looking in the mirror, I saw a man of 58, with more gray in his hair than I cared to admit and lines around his eyes that told stories of long hours and quiet heartaches. As I was about to leave, I heard footsteps overhead, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing to the floor. Then Jessica's frustrated voice, sharp and clear through the ceiling. "Ugh, Kevin, I told you not to put that there. It was a gift from my mother." Kevin's voice was lower, a placating rumble. "Babe, it's just a vase. We can get another one." "It's not about the vase. It's about the fact that you never listened to me." Their arguments had become more frequent lately, usually about money. Kevin had expensive tastes that his job as a freelance consultant, whatever that meant, couldn't support. I'd helped them out more times than I could count, slipping Jessica a few $100s here and there, telling her it was extra I'd made from a side job. Every dollar was a small, desperate attempt to buy back her affection. I grabbed my keys and headed out into the evening. The air was cool. The city was waking up for the night, its lights beginning to sparkle against the deepening twilight sky. Driving towards the Prescott, I felt a familiar sense of dread, mixed with a weary resignation. It wasn't just about picking up Sarah. It was about stepping back into a world I had gladly left behind. A world of pretense and performance, where nothing was as it seemed. It was a world that had taken my wife and was slowly, surely, poisoning my daughter. I didn't know it then, but this ordinary Tuesday night was the beginning of the end. It was the first small push that would lead to a final, devastating shove. The story wasn't over. It was just circling back to where it began, ready for the second act. And this time, the betrayal would cut even deeper. The Prescott Hotel loomed ahead, a monument of glass and steel piercing the night sky. I pulled up to the service entrance, avoiding the pomp of the main driveway where valets in sharp red jackets were whisking away luxury cars. I sent Sarah a text. "I'm here, back entrance." A few minutes later, she appeared, a silhouette in a sleek black dress, looking just as elegant as she had 5 years ago. Age had been kind to her. Or maybe it was just that her life was easier now. She slid into the passenger seat, bringing a wave of expensive perfume with her. "Thanks for coming, Frank," she said, her eyes scanning the simple interior of my old pickup truck, with a faint, almost imperceptible curl of her lip. "Still driving this thing, I see." "It gets me where I need to go," I said, my voice flat. I pulled away from the curb, merging into the river of traffic. The gala was a huge success, she chattered on, oblivious to the tension that filled the small cab. "We raised over $1 million for the new pediatric wing. $1 million. Can you believe it? Everyone was there. The mayor, the Van Horns, even that tech billionaire everyone's talking about." She was naming names I no longer knew, describing a life I no longer cared about. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on the road. The silence stretched between her sentences, filled with everything we'd never said to each other. "How's Jessica?" she asked, the question sounding like an afterthought. "She's good," I lied. "Working hard." "And that boyfriend of hers, Kevin?" There was a critical edge to her voice. "Is he still around?" "They live together, Sarah. Upstairs from me." "Right," she said, looking out the window. "I don't know about him, Frank. He seems a bit opportunistic. The few times I've met him, all he talks about is money. How to get it, how to spend it. Jessica deserves better. She deserves stability." The hypocrisy of her statement was breathtaking. She, who had shattered our family for a fleeting thrill, was judging my daughter's choice in partners. The anger, hot and familiar, rose in my chest, but I swallowed it down. Arguing with Sarah was like punching water. It was pointless and exhausting. "He makes her happy," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Happiness doesn't pay the bills," she sniffed. "Jessica has expensive taste. She got that from me." She said it with a hint of pride. "You know, I worry about her. About you, too. Living in that little basement apartment? It's not right. A man your age should be comfortable." "I'm comfortable enough," I said, gripping the steering wheel. She had no idea. No idea about the investments, the portfolio, the quiet fortune I had built and hidden away. She just saw the worn jeans and the old truck and the basement apartment. And she pitied me. The thought was both infuriating and, in a strange way, liberating. Her pity was a shield. It kept her at a distance. We drove the rest of the way in a strained silence. I pulled up in front of the luxurious condo building she now called home. "Well, thanks again, Frank," she said, gathering her purse. She paused with her hand on the door handle. "You know," she said, her voice softening for the first time all night, "Mark and I are getting married." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I stared straight ahead at the brightly lit lobby of her building. Married. So, it hadn't been a fleeting thing after all. It was real. They had built a life on the ruins of ours. That's nice, I managed to choke out. Congratulations. She gave me a strange look, a mixture of guilt and surprise. I think she expected me to be angry, to yell. But I was just tired. So incredibly tired. It's for the best, Frank. We're happy, she said, as if trying to convince herself as much as me. Then she got out, and without a backward glance, she walked into the building and out of my life. Again. I sat there for a long time, the engine humming, the world outside moving on as if my own personal earthquake hadn't just struck. Mark, my best friend, the man who had been the best man at my wedding, the man whose kids had grown up with mine. He wasn't just my partner in business. He was supposed to be my partner in life, a brother. The betrayal wasn't just about Sarah. It was about him, too. The divorce had been a clean cut with Sarah, but with Mark, it had been a slow, messy amputation. I had to buy him out of the company we'd built together from nothing. My lawyer, David, had handled the negotiations. I couldn't even be in the same room with him. I sold off a few assets, gave him a generous buyout, and never looked back. I told everyone we had creative differences. Another lie to paper over the gaping wound. Driving back to my quiet brownstone, the city felt different. Colder, more menacing. My little basement apartment, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like a bunker, a place to hide. When I got home, the lights were on in Jessica's apartment. I could hear their voices, muffled but clear. I paused at my door, listening. I just don't understand why he has to live here, Kevin was saying, his voice laced with annoyance. It's weird. My dad doesn't live in my basement. He doesn't have anywhere else to go, Kev. Jessica's voice was defensive, but weak. Mom took everything. He's just getting back on his feet. It's been 5 years, Jess. How long does it take? He's a grown man, and he's always around. It's like we have no privacy. Plus, what do your friends think? That your dad is our superintendent? A painful silence followed. Then Jessica spoke, her voice small. He helps out. He fixes things. He should be paying rent. Kevin muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. A real rent, not just chipping in for the Wi-Fi. This is prime real estate. We could get $2,000 a month for that basement unit, easy. My hand froze on my doorknob. Rent. The word hung in the air between the floorboards, a poisoned dart. So, Sarah was right about one thing. Kevin was opportunistic, and he was planting a seed in my daughter's mind, a dark, ugly weed that I feared would soon take root. I quietly let myself into my apartment, the familiar smell of sawdust doing nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. I sat down in my worn armchair, the springs groaning in protest. The ceiling above me was no longer a comfort. It was a barrier, a thin layer of plaster and wood separating me from a daughter who was being taught to see me not as her father, but as a liability, an asset that wasn't performing. I thought about the brownstone. I had bought it for a song 15 years ago. The neighborhood was rough then, but I saw the potential. I'd poured my own sweat into it, refinishing the floors, updating the plumbing, restoring the original woodwork. I owned it outright. No mortgage. It was my single greatest asset, now worth a small fortune. Jessica knew none of this. She and Kevin paid a token amount each month, a figure I'd told them was a special family rate, from the owner, a man I'd invented named Mr. Henderson. They sent the check to a P.O. box I'd set up, and I would simply deposit it into my account. The charade had felt necessary at the time, a way to maintain my cover while still teaching them some responsibility. Now, it felt like a trap I had set for myself. My simple life wasn't an act of poverty. It was an act of choice. After the divorce, after the glamour and pretense of my life with Sarah had crumbled away, I found I didn't miss it. I didn't miss the galas, the superficial conversations, the constant pressure to keep up appearances. I missed my family, the family I thought I had. I wanted to reconnect with Jessica, to show her that love and relationships weren't about what you could buy, but what you could build. With your hands, with your heart. But I was failing. Kevin's voice echoed in my head. He should be paying rent. It wasn't about the money. I could have paid 1,000 rents. It was about the sentiment behind it. It was about reducing a father's love to a transaction, a monthly fee. I got up and walked over to my small workbench in the corner of the main room. I picked up a half-finished wooden bird, a small carving I was making for a neighbor's grandson. I ran my thumb over the smooth, sanded wood. It was a simple thing, but it was real. It was honest. I thought about my daughter upstairs, living a life surrounded by shiny, expensive things. Yet her foundation was cracking, just like mine had. Kevin was her mark. And I was afraid that she, like her mother, was choosing the glitter over the gold. The weight of it all settled on me, heavy and suffocating. The night was far from over, but a new terrible chapter had just begun. And I was the only one who knew how the previous one had ended. The weeks that followed that night were a study in slow, creeping corrosion. Kevin's poisonous suggestion about rent didn't manifest immediately. Instead, it was like a subtle change in the atmosphere. The air grew heavier, the interactions more strained. It started with small things, little barbs disguised as jokes. One Saturday, I was in the small patch of garden behind the brownstone, pulling weeds. It was my one patch of green in the city, and I tended to it meticulously. Kevin came out onto their second-floor deck, holding a mug of coffee. He leaned on the railing, looking down at me. "Morning, Frank," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. "Working hard, I see. You know, a professional landscaping service would charge a fortune for that." "I enjoy it," I said, not looking up from a stubborn patch of crabgrass. "Yeah, but, you know, time is money," he continued, taking a sip from his mug. "You spend all this time on the garden, fixing the leaky faucet in our bathroom last week, tinkering in your workshop. You could be monetizing those skills, you know. Start a little handyman business on the side. Earn some real cash." I finally looked up at him. He was smiling, but his eyes were cold, calculating. He wasn't giving me friendly advice. He was assessing me. He was telling me, in his own slick way, that I wasn't pulling my weight, that my contributions, the free labor, the constant repairs, the emotional support I tried to provide, had no value because they didn't come with a price tag. "I do okay," I said, my voice tight. Sure, he said, backing off when he sensed my tone. "Just a thought, always looking out for you, champ." He gave me a mock salute with his coffee mug and went back inside. The requests for my handyman services became more frequent and less polite. It was no longer, "Dad, could you please take a look at this?" It was, "The dishwasher's making that noise again. You need to fix it." It was as if my role had been officially downgraded from father to building superintendent. I went along with it, swallowing my pride, telling myself it was a way to stay connected to Jessica. But every time I tightened a bolt or snaked a drain in their apartment, a small piece of my dignity chipped away. I saw them bringing in new things almost daily. A giant flat-screen television that barely fit on the wall, a sleek new espresso machine that probably cost more than my monthly food budget. Designer shopping bags from expensive downtown boutiques. They were living far beyond their means, and I knew it. I also knew where some of the money was coming from. Every few weeks, Jessica would call me, her voice sweet and a little desperate. "Dad, I'm so sorry to ask, but we're a little short for the car payment this month. Could you possibly help us out? Just until Kevin's next big check comes in?" And like a fool, I always said yes. I'd go to the bank, withdraw a few $100s in cash, and slip it into an envelope for her. I told myself I was helping my daughter, but I knew, deep down, I was just funding Kevin's lavish lifestyle. I was enabling the very thing that was destroying her character. The overheard conversations from my apartment below became my own private torture. I learned to decipher the sounds. The sharp, angry thud of a slammed door was a fight about bills. The frantic, high-pitched chatter was Jessica on the phone with a credit card company. The long, heavy silences were the worst. They spoke of a deep, simmering unhappiness that no new gadget could fix. One evening, I heard them talking about a vacation. "We have to go to Aspen for New Year's," Kevin was saying. "Everyone's going to be there. It's all about networking, Jess. The people I could meet, it could be huge for my business." "Aspen? Kevin, we can't afford that." Jessica's voice was weary. "The flight, the hotel, it's thousands of dollars. We're already behind on." "Don't worry about the money." He cut her off. "I have a plan. We just need to free up some more cash flow, optimize our assets." I knew what that meant. I was the asset that needed optimizing. The final straw came a week later. It was a Thursday. I had just come back from a long walk, trying to clear my head. As I approached the brownstone, I saw a sleek, black convertible parked out front. A man in an expensive suit was getting out of the driver's side. It was Mark. My blood ran cold. I froze on the sidewalk, half hidden behind a large oak tree. What was he doing here? Then I saw the front door of the brownstone open, and Jessica and Kevin came out, all smiles. "Mark, so good to see you," Kevin said, shaking his hand enthusiastically. Jessica gave him an awkward hug. "Kevin, Jessica," Mark said, his voice smooth and confident. "Good to see you both. Sarah told me you were looking for some financial advice, and I was happy to swing by." Sarah, my ex-wife, had sent my ex-best friend, the man who had destroyed my family, to advise my daughter and her greedy boyfriend. The betrayal was so layered, so profound, it was almost poetic. I watched from the shadows as they stood on the steps, laughing and talking. Mark gestured at the brownstone. "Great property," he said. "Lots of potential here. You guys are lucky to have such a great deal on the rent." "Well, about that," Kevin said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "We're actually thinking of ways to increase the revenue from the property. There's a situation with the downstairs unit." My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't hear Mark's reply, but I saw him nod, a shrewd look in his eyes. He clapped Kevin on the shoulder, a gesture of male camaraderie that made my stomach turn. Then they all went inside. I didn't go into my apartment. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, my mind reeling. I walked for hours, with no destination in mind. The city streets were a blur of headlights and anonymous faces. The conversation I had just witnessed was a declaration of war. They were plotting against me, in my own house, and they had enlisted the architect of my first great heartbreak to help them. It was all so clear now. Kevin's ambition, Jessica's weakness, Sarah's meddling, Mark's smug reappearance. It was a perfect storm of greed and disrespect, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The simple life I had chosen, the quiet existence I had curated to heal myself and reconnect with my daughter, had been misinterpreted as failure. My humility had been mistaken for weakness. My silence had been taken as consent. I finally ended up at a small, all-night diner, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights that hummed. I ordered a black coffee and just sat there, staring into the dark liquid. The waitress, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, refilled my cup 3 times without me having to ask. What was I going to do? I could confront them. I could reveal the truth, throw the deed to the house down on their expensive coffee table and watch their faces. But the thought of it brought me no satisfaction. It would be ugly, messy. It would be a fight. And I was so tired of fighting. I had been fighting to hold my family together my whole life, and I had lost every time. But what was the alternative? To let them walk all over me? To let Kevin convince my daughter to throw her own father out on the street? The thought of Jessica standing at my door, demanding rent I didn't owe, was a new kind of nightmare. I thought about the man I was, Frank Miller, a man who built things, a man who believed in honesty and hard work, a man who loved his daughter more than anything in the world. But love couldn't be a one-way street. It required respect, and they had shown me none. Sitting in that diner, with the smell of stale coffee and bacon in the air, a decision began to form in my mind. It was a hard, cold, and terrifying decision. It wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. It was about self-preservation. They had given me an ultimatum without even speaking it. Change or be cast aside. Monetize or be deemed worthless. Fine, I would monetize. I would play their game, but I would play it by my rules. I would use the very weapon they sought, money, to teach them a lesson they would never forget. A lesson about value, about respect, and about the devastating consequences of taking a good man's love for granted. I paid for my coffee, leaving the kind waitress a $20 tip, and walked back out into the night. The city was quiet now, in the lonely hours before dawn. When I got back to the brownstone, the lights in Jessica's apartment were off. The convertible was gone. I let myself into my basement sanctuary for what felt like the last time. The air no longer smelled like home, it smelled like a battlefield, and I was finally ready to fight back. The calm before the storm lasted exactly 4 days. 4 days of eerie silence from upstairs. No arguments, no loud music. Just a tense, watchful quiet that was more unsettling than any fight. I spent those 4 days in my workshop, not building anything new, but carefully packing away my tools. I wrapped each chisel, each plane, each saw in oiled cloth, laying them gently in their wooden boxes. It felt like a funeral. I was packing up a part of myself, a life I had tried so hard to build. I was preparing for an exile I was about to impose on myself. During this time, I made a phone call. "David, it's Frank." David Collins had been my lawyer and my friend for 30 years. He was a sharp, no-nonsense man who had guided me through the legal maze of my divorce and the buyout of my business. He was one of the few people who knew the whole truth about everything. "Frank, good to hear your voice. Everything all right? You sound different." "I need to talk to you, David. In person," I said. "It's about the brownstone." We agreed to meet the next day. I didn't tell him any more over the phone. Some things needed to be said, face to face. The confrontation came on a Saturday afternoon. I was polishing a small wooden box when I heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps on the stairs leading down to my apartment. Not the light, quick steps of Jessica. the heavier, more arrogant tread of Kevin. Then a sharp, loud knock on my door. It wasn't the polite rap of a visitor. It was a summons. I took a deep breath, placed the polishing cloth on my workbench, and walked to the door. I opened it. Jessica was standing there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was pale, her expression a mixture of defiance and discomfort. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Behind her, hovering like a vulture, was Kevin. He had a smug, triumphant look on his face. He had clearly rehearsed this moment with her, coached her, pushed her into it. He was the puppeteer, and my daughter was the puppet. "Dad," she began, her voice tight and unnatural. "We need to talk." "Okay," I said quietly, stepping back to let them in. My small apartment suddenly felt claustrophobic with them in it. Kevin's eyes scanned my simple furnishings with disdain. "We've been doing some thinking," Jessica continued, her gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "About the living situation, about this apartment." I waited. I said nothing. My silence seemed to unnerve her. She glanced at Kevin for support. He gave her a slight nod, a silent command to continue. "Things are getting really expensive," she said, the words rushing out now. "The city, the taxes, the cost of living, it's just a lot. And we're carrying the burden for this whole building." The absurdity of the statement, that their subsidized minimal rent was carrying the burden for a property worth millions, was almost comical. But I didn't laugh. "We feel that you're not contributing your fair share," she finally said, the words landing like stones in the quiet room. I looked at my daughter, my Jessica, the little girl I had taught to ride a bike, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose bedtime stories I had read until my voice was hoarse. I searched her face for any sign of the child she had been, any flicker of doubt or love. I saw only a stranger, her features hardened by greed and resentment. "What is it you want, Jessica?" I asked, my voice calm and steady. Kevin stepped forward then, unable to let her handle it alone. "What we want, Frank, is for you to be a responsible adult. We've been letting you stay here out of the goodness of our hearts. But we can't afford to subsidize you anymore. It's time for you to pay proper market rate rent, or find somewhere else to live." There it was, the ugly, naked truth of it. It wasn't a request, it was a threat. And then Jessica, my own flesh and blood, delivered the final, fatal blow. She finally looked at me, her eyes cold and hard. "He's right, Dad," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "We've been more than generous. From now on, your rent for this apartment is $2,000 a month, due on the 1st. If you can't pay it, then you need to get out. Pay the rent or get out." The words echoed in the small space, bouncing off the concrete walls, drilling into my soul. It was the culmination of 5 years of misunderstanding, of disrespect, of slow creeping poison. It was the echo of my wife's betrayal, but 1,000 times more painful, because this was my child. I looked from her face to Kevin's smug grin. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally cornered the old man, the freeloader, the burden. He thought he was about to get an extra $2,000 a month to fund his next ski trip. And in that moment, all the pain, all the hurt, all the quiet suffering of the past 5 years coalesced into a single, cold point of clarity. The love I felt for my daughter was still there, a deep, aching cavern in my chest. But the hope that I could ever get her back, the real her, died right there in that basement apartment. They had killed it. I didn't yell, I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself. My reaction was so quiet it seemed to startle them. I simply nodded. "Okay," I said. Just that one word. Jessica blinked, confused. "Okay? What does that mean, okay?" "It means I understand," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I looked directly at her, and for the first time, she flinched, unable to hold my gaze. "You've made your position very clear." I turned and walked over to the small closet near my bed. I pulled out a worn leather duffel bag that was already packed. I had known this was coming. I had prepared for it. I walked to my workbench and picked up the small, half-finished wooden bird, wrapping it carefully in the polishing cloth and placing it in the bag. Then I zipped it shut. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked, her voice tinged with alarm. This wasn't going according to their script. They expected me to beg, to argue, to negotiate a lower rent. They did not expect this. "You told me to pay the rent or get out," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "I've made my choice." I walked towards the door. I didn't look at them. I looked at the things in my apartment, the worn armchair, the simple bed, the tools I had already packed away. Goodbye to all of that. "So that's it?" Jessica cried, a note of hysteria in her voice. "You're just leaving? Where will you go?" Was it concern I heard? Or was it panic at the thought of losing her personal handyman? I didn't know, and I no longer cared. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see them out of the corner of my eye. Kevin was no longer smiling. He looked confused, like a chess player whose opponent had just tipped over the board and walked away. "You'll figure it out," I said. And then I opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and closed it gently behind me. I didn't slam it. I closed it with a quiet, final click. The sound of a chapter ending for good. I walked up the stairs and out the front door of the brownstone, into the late afternoon sun. I didn't look back. I just kept walking. The weight of the duffel bag on my shoulder a strange comfort. It was all I had left, and it was enough. I was free. The pain was immense, a gaping wound in my chest. But for the first time in a very long time, I was truly, completely free. They didn't know it yet, but they had just evicted the wrong man, and the consequences of their greed were about to come crashing down on them. The first night of my new life was spent in a clean, anonymous hotel room 20 miles outside the city. The room smelled of disinfectant and air freshener, a sterile scent that was the polar opposite of my sawdust-filled workshop. I dropped my duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the stiff, neatly made bed. The silence was absolute. No footsteps overhead, no muffled arguments through the floorboards. It was just me, alone. The feeling was a strange cocktail of devastation and relief. The image of Jessica's face, cold and resolute, was burned into my mind. "Pay the rent or get out." The words played on a loop, each repetition another twist of the knife. A part of me wanted to crumble, to give in to the immense grief of losing my daughter, possibly forever. But another, stronger part of me felt a grim sense of purpose. The decision I had made in that all-night diner had now been set in motion. There was no going back. The next morning, I met David at his office. It was a handsome suite of rooms in a downtown building, with thick carpets, dark wood paneling, and the quiet hum of serious business. David greeted me with a firm handshake and a worried look in his eyes. "Frank," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "you look like you've been through a war." "I have, David," I said, sinking into a plush leather chair. "And I've finally surrendered. I told him everything. I started with the overheard conversations, the constant demands for money, Kevin's influence. I told him about Mark showing up, sent by Sarah to advise them. And I ended with a scene from yesterday afternoon. The ultimatum, my quiet departure. I laid it all out, my voice low and steady, recounting the facts without emotion. The emotion was a fire burning deep inside me. I couldn't afford to let it out. Not yet. David listened patiently, his hands steepled on his large mahogany desk. His expression grew darker with every word I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight with anger on my behalf. "The ungrateful little," he started, then caught himself. He shook his head slowly. "Frank, I am so sorry. After everything with Sarah and Mark, for this to happen with Jessica. It's unthinkable." "It is what it is, David," I said, the weariness I felt seeping into my voice. "But I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because I've made a decision. I want to sell the brownstone." David's eyebrows shot up. "Sell it? Just like that?" "Just like that," I confirmed. "I'm done. I want to cut the cord. I want to liquidate the asset, as Kevin would say, and I want to disappear." A slow smile spread across David's face. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who was about to bring about some long overdue justice. "Frank, that property in this market, you're sitting on a gold mine. You know that, right?" "I have an idea," I said. "What do you think it's worth?" He leaned back in his chair. "Well, you bought it for what? $150,000? 15, 16 years ago? In today's market, with the renovations you've done in that neighborhood, easily $2.5 million, maybe more if we get a bidding war." $2.5 million. I let the number hang in the air. It felt unreal, like a number in a board game. It was a world away from the $2,000 a month my daughter had tried to extort from me. "Okay," I said. "Let's sell it. And I want to do it fast. I don't care about squeezing every last penny out of it. I want a clean, quick sale to a cash buyer if possible. I want it done." "Consider it done," David said, his eyes gleaming. He was already reaching for the phone. "I have a realtor, a shark named Cynthia, who lives for this kind of thing. She'll have it sold before they even know what's happening." "But Frank, what about them? Jessica and Kevin? They're tenants. They have rights." "They are month-to-month tenants who have never had a formal lease agreement with the owner," I said, the words coming easily. I had thought this all through. "They pay a ridiculously below-market rate to a P.O. box. The new owner will simply give them the legally required 30-day notice to vacate. It's all by the book." "And you don't want to be the one to tell them?" David asked gently. "No," I said, my voice firm. "They made their choice when they treated me like a stranger, a burden. So they can hear the news from a stranger. Let the lawyers handle it. That's what they're for." The next few weeks were a blur of activity, all of it handled by David and the formidable Cynthia. I stayed at the hotel, paying for my room in cash every week. I bought a few changes of clothes, a burner phone for my calls with David, and I waited. Cynthia, it turned out, was even better than David had advertised. She didn't even need to list the property publicly. She had a list of investors, wealthy clients looking to park their money in prime real estate. Within 10 days, she had a solid offer. $2.5 million, all cash. From an investment group that specialized in renovating and flipping historic properties. They wanted to close in 2 weeks. David called me with the news. "It's a done deal, Frank. All you need to do is come in and sign the papers. I felt a strange emptiness. There was no joy, no sense of victory, just the heavy, hollow feeling of a limb that has been amputated. It was necessary, but the phantom pain was real. The day of the closing, I went to David's office again. The papers were all laid out on the massive table in the conference room, a stack of documents that represented my final, irrevocable break with the life I had known. I sat there and signed my name over and over again. Frank Miller, seller, owner. When it was finished, David slid a single piece of paper across the table to me. It was the closing statement, a summary of the transaction. At the top, it listed the property address. Underneath that, seller, Frank Miller. And at the bottom, the final figure. Net proceeds to seller, $2,425,000, after commissions and fees. The money will be wired to your account by the end of the day, David said. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. What happens now? Now, David said, a grim look on his face. The buyer's legal team takes over. They will formally notify all current tenants that the property has been sold and that their tenancy is being terminated. The notice will give them 30 days to vacate the premises. It's standard procedure. They should receive it by certified mail within the next 48 hours. So the clock was ticking. In less than 2 days, the bomb would drop. I left David's office and started walking. I didn't want to go back to the hotel. I needed air. I found myself wandering into a travel agency. On the wall was a huge, beautiful poster of a lake surrounded by mountains and pine trees. The water was as smooth as glass, reflecting a brilliant blue sky. It looked quiet. It looked peaceful. I walked up to the counter. "Can you tell me about places like that?" I asked the agent. "Places that are quiet." I spent the next 2 days looking at listings for small cabins in remote parts of the country. Montana, Oregon, upstate New York. Places where the closest neighbor was a mile away and the only sounds were the wind in the trees and the cry of a hawk. I found a small rustic cabin on a lake in Maine. It had a stone fireplace and, most importantly, a large detached workshop. I made an offer on it, sight unseen. It was a fraction of the money I now had. The rest I would invest safely, live off the interest. I would have more than enough. I would finally have the simple life I craved. But this time, it would be on my terms. No lies, no pretense. Just me, my tools, and the quiet of the woods. My burner phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from David. "The Eagle has landed. Notices were delivered and signed for at 11:03 this morning." So they knew. The fuse had been lit. I switched off the phone, took out the SIM card, and dropped it into a nearby trash can. There was nothing more to say. The next move was theirs, and I had a feeling I knew what it would be. I was just waiting for the inevitable, panicked phone call. But they no longer had a number to reach me at. They were on their own. The panicked call didn't come, of course. They couldn't reach me. Instead, the silence stretched for 3 days. 3 days where I imagined the scene in that apartment, the arrival of the certified letter, the confusion turning to disbelief, then to sheer, blind panic. I pictured Jessica's frantic attempts to call my old number, only to get the curt, number disconnected message. I pictured Kevin, his smug confidence evaporating as the reality of their situation set in. They had been so sure of their power, so certain of their control over the poor old man in the basement. Now, a faceless new owner had pulled the rug out from under them, and their safety net, me, had vanished. On the 4th day, a call came through to David's office. His assistant patched it through to the new phone I had bought. The caller ID was blocked. I answered. Hello? Dad? Oh my God, Dad, is that you? I've been trying to call you for days. Your phone is off. It was Jessica. Her voice was a high-pitched, frantic mess, bordering on hysterical. I got a new phone, I said calmly. Dad, you won't believe what happened. It's horrible. The landlord, that Mr. Henderson or whoever, he sold the building. We got a letter, an official legal letter. It's an eviction notice. We have to be out in 30 days. 30 days, Dad. Where are we supposed to go? What are we supposed to do? She was weeping now. Thick, gasping sobs. There was no apology in her voice. No remorse for how she had treated me. Just pure, unadulterated panic for her own situation. She still saw me as her fellow victim, the other tenant who had been screwed over by the heartless owner. An eviction notice? I said, my voice a perfect imitation of surprise. That's terrible. Terrible. It's a catastrophe, she shrieked. Kevin is losing his mind. He's trying to find a lawyer, but they all want money up front. We have nothing, Dad. You have to do something. You have to help us. What do you expect me to do, Jessica? I asked, my voice still quiet and calm. I don't know. Talk to someone. Find the new owner. You're good at that stuff, at fixing things. There has to be a way to fight this. We can't be homeless. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Just a week ago, she had been ready to make me homeless without a second thought. Now she was begging me to save her from the same fate. This was the moment, the culmination of everything. I could have told her the truth right then and there, over the phone. But that felt too easy, too impersonal. After everything they had put me through, they deserved to see my face when their world came crashing down. They deserved to look me in the eye. Okay, Jessica, I said, after a long pause. Calm down. Panicking won't help. Let me make a call. I have a lawyer, a good one. Maybe he can give us some advice. Let's all meet at his office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. I'll text you the address. Oh, Dad, thank you, she cried, a wave of relief washing through her voice. I knew you'd help us. I knew you wouldn't let this happen. Kevin, Dad's got a lawyer. He's going to fix it. I could hear Kevin's muffled voice in the background, a mixture of suspicion and hope. I hung up the phone. I felt a cold, hard knot in the pit of my stomach. This was it. The final act. The next morning, I was at David's office by 9:30. I was wearing a simple, clean suit that I had bought the day before. It felt strange, like a costume. David greeted me at the door. He looked at my suit and gave a small, approving nod. Ready for the performance? He asked. As I'll ever be, I said. We sat waiting in his large conference room, the same one where I had signed away the brownstone. The closing statement, the one with my name on it as the seller, was in a neat folder on the table. At 10 o'clock sharp, his assistant showed them in. Jessica looked awful. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying, and she was twisting her hands nervously in her lap. Kevin followed her, trying to project an air of confidence, but his eyes were shifty and his jaw was clenched. He was dressed in one of his flashy suits, trying to look like a man who belonged in a high-powered lawyer's office. They both stopped short when they saw me, sitting there at the head of the table, looking calm and composed. Dad, Jessica said, her voice a whisper. Jessica. Kevin, I said, nodding toward the chairs opposite me. Please sit down. This is my lawyer, David Collins. David gave them a curt, professional nod, but didn't offer to shake their hands. They sat, perching on the edge of their expensive leather chairs like nervous birds. So, Kevin began, taking charge. Frank, your dad, said you might be able to help us with this ridiculous eviction situation. The new owners haven't even had the decency to contact us directly. We just got this cold, formal letter. David let him talk, letting him build up his head of self-righteous steam. I just watched them, my expression unreadable. When Kevin finally wound down, David leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "I've reviewed the notice," he said, his voice deep and authoritative, "and I'm afraid it is perfectly legal. The property was sold. The new owner has the right to terminate a month-to-month tenancy with 30 days' notice. There is no legal recourse. You will have to vacate the premises by the date on the notice." Jessica's face crumpled. "No. There has to be something." "But that's insane," Kevin exploded, his voice cracking. "We've been perfect tenants. We've poured money into that place." I almost laughed out loud. David held up a hand to silence him. "The law is the law. However," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "I did manage to get in touch with the representative of the seller." A flicker of hope ignited in Jessica's eyes. "The seller? Mr. Henderson?" "There is no Mr. Henderson," David said flatly. "That was a name used for correspondence purposes only." He then reached for the folder in the middle of the table. He opened it and slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood surface towards them. It was the closing statement. "This," David said, "is a summary of the sale." Kevin snatched it up. Jessica leaned in to look over his shoulder. I watched their eyes scan the document. I saw the exact moment they comprehended it. Kevin's eyes widened in disbelief, his face draining of all color. Jessica's mouth fell open, and a small, choked sound escaped her lips. They stared at the top of the page, at the two words printed in clear, black ink next to the word seller. Frank Miller. They looked up from the paper, their gazes flying to me, sitting silently at the other end of the table. Their expressions were a kaleidoscope of shock, confusion, horror, and dawning, gut-wrenching understanding. Jessica's face was ashen. "Dad," she whispered, the word barely audible. I don't understand. This says, you're the seller. It says you own the building." I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the table. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes, and for the first time, I let all the pain and disappointment I had felt show on my face. "You shouted at me, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of 1,000 heartbreaks. "You told me to pay the rent or get out. So I left. I got out." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I just didn't realize you expected me to leave my own house behind." I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the thick carpet. "The sale was for $2.5 million. I continued, my voice steady. "The new owners want you out in 30 days. When your eviction notice arrived, you asked me for my response. This is my response." I looked from Jessica's shattered expression to Kevin's face, which was now a mask of pure, avaricious rage. He wasn't sad. He was furious that he had been standing on a mountain of gold and had been too stupid to realize it. He wasn't mourning the loss of a relationship. He was mourning the loss of a payday. "I believe we're done here," I said to David. I turned and walked toward the door, not looking back. I could hear Jessica start to sob, a raw, broken sound. I could hear Kevin hiss her name. "Jessica! Shut up!" But I didn't stop. I walked out of that conference room, out of that office, and back into the sunlight of the city. The great, unburdening weight that had been crushing me for years had finally been lifted. The performance was over, and my response had left them utterly, completely speechless. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a series of quiet, seismic shocks. I didn't stick around to witness the fallout firsthand. I didn't need to. David kept me informed. He told me that after I left the conference room, Kevin had erupted, not at me, but at Jessica. He accused her of being stupid, of not knowing her own father was rich, of costing him a fortune. His true, ugly nature had been laid bare under the harsh fluorescent lights of that office. Jessica, David said, just sat there, weeping, completely broken. I went straight from David's office to the airport and took the first flight to Maine. When I landed, the air was different. It was crisp and clean and smelled of pine and damp earth. It was the smell of a new beginning. I rented a car and drove the 2 hours to the small lakeside town where I'd bought my cabin. It was even better than the pictures. It was small, solid, made of dark, weathered logs, with a stone chimney and a wide porch that looked out over a vast, still lake. And there, just as promised, was the workshop, a separate, spacious building with big windows that let in the afternoon light. The first few weeks were about settling in. I bought a bed, a comfortable armchair, a sturdy kitchen table. I unpacked the duffel bag that held the last remnants of my old life. I carefully unwrapped my woodworking tools, the familiar weight of them in my hands, a profound comfort. I arranged them in the new workshop, giving each one its proper place. I bought groceries. I met my nearest neighbor, a retired fisherman named George, who lived half a mile down the dirt road. We shared a cup of coffee on my porch, and he didn't ask me a single question about my past. He just pointed out where the best fishing spots were and told me which parts of the lake froze first in winter. I was disconnected from my old world, but news still found a way to travel. About a month after I'd left, a thick envelope arrived from David's office. Inside was a short note from him and a letter from Jessica. David's note was brief. Frank, Kevin left her the day they moved out of the brownstone. He took the convertible and disappeared. She's on her own. I also have some other news for you. I was reviewing the financials from your old business buyout. I found something. Mark wasn't just cheating with your wife. He was cheating you. He had been systematically embezzling funds for at least 3 years before the split. Nothing huge, just small amounts that were hard to trace. When you bought him out, you essentially paid him with money he had already stolen from you. But the silver lining, Frank, is that if you two had stayed in business together, his greed would have eventually sunk the company and you with it. Sarah's betrayal, in the cruelest twist of fate, saved you from financial ruin. I put David's note down, my head spinning. Another layer of deceit, another secret. The pain of Mark's betrayal had been so personal, I had never even considered the financial angle. It was a strange, bitter pill to swallow. The event that had destroyed my emotional life had inadvertently saved my professional one. With a deep breath, I picked up Jessica's letter. It was written on simple, plain paper, not the fancy stationery she used to favor. Her handwriting was shaky. Dad, it began. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know where you are. David said he would forward it, but he wouldn't tell me anything. I don't blame him. I don't blame you. I have been trying to find the words to write this for weeks. I'm sorry it feels so small, so pathetic for what I did. It's like trying to patch a canyon with a Band-Aid. But it's all I have. I am so sorry. When you walked out of that lawyer's office, my whole world fell apart. But the truth is, it had been falling apart for a long time. I just couldn't see it because it was filled with so many bright, shiny things that blinded me. Kevin showed me his true colors that day. Everything he ever said he felt for me was a lie. He didn't love me. He loved the idea of what I could get for him. And when he realized there was no money, he was gone. I've spent the last month living in a tiny studio apartment across town. I have a job. A real job. Waitressing at a diner. It's hard work. My feet hurt all the time. But at the end of the day, the money I make is mine. I earned it. For the first time in a long time, I feel real. I think about you every day. I think about how you tried to show me what was real all along. Your workshop, the things you built, the quiet way you lived. I thought it was because you had failed. I was so arrogant, so stupid. I see now that it wasn't failure. It was a choice. You chose what was real, and I chose the illusion. I let Mom and then Kevin poison my mind against you. I let them teach me to measure love in dollars and cents. The day I stood at your door and told you to pay rent or get out was the worst day of my life. I hate the person I was in that moment. I hate that I let myself be used like that I could ever look at you, my father, and see a burden. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. And I am not asking for anything. Not money, not help. Nothing. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see everything. The lesson you taught me was brutal, but I needed it. You didn't just sell a building, Dad. You held up a mirror, and I finally saw the monster I had become. I hope you are somewhere peaceful. I hope you are happy. I hope you are building beautiful things. I love you. I always have. Even when I was too blind to show it. Jessica. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through the tears that streamed down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, not entirely. They were tears of grief for what was lost, but also tears of a painful, cathartic release. I folded the letter and put it in the top drawer of my nightstand. I walked out onto the porch and looked out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The water was calm, reflecting the colors perfectly. A loon called out from across the water, its lonely, beautiful cry echoing in the stillness. I had lost my wife, my best friend, my home, and for a time, my daughter. I had been betrayed, disrespected, and cast out. But in the end, I had found myself. I had found peace. The scars were still there, deep and permanent, a roadmap of the journey that had brought me here. They would always be a part of me, but they no longer hurt to the touch. I didn't know if I would ever see Jessica again. Maybe one day, maybe not. For now, it was enough to know that she was finding her own way, that she was finally learning to build something real for herself. And I was here, in my quiet corner of the world, ready to do the same.